Gentlemen, I will call this regular meeting of council Tuesday, July 23rd, 7 p.m. to order, please. And make sure all your phones are shut off, any ringing tones. And we'll stand for the national anthem. Okay, I will ask council if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof. Okay, seeing none. We're going to move right into a presentation. On our Canada Day, we had a bake auction, and items were donated by the skating club, the youth soccer, and the minor hockey league. And we raised a total of $811 in that bake auction on Canada Day. It's going to be distributed equally in thirds to each of those organizations. So their representatives are here this evening, so I'll ask that they come forward and we'll make the presentation. Okay, we're going into delegations at this time, and we have three. So the thing on this, these delegations are, it's on Marshville Drive development, and that's already been spoken to, so by each of these delegations. So this evening, we basically require new information to be presented, so that's what we're looking to see. 10 minutes as always. I'll let you know at the 1 minute mark. And we're only looking for new information, additional information to what was presented previously. So we'll ask for Chelsea Robinson, please. Just hit the red button there. And I'll let you know at 9 minutes. I'll give you a little wave. So.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. I am asking to defer this application because we were notified by Sarah Ivins just this past Friday, July 19th at 4:19 p.m. So I am requesting a deferral, firstly, because we do not have access to the reports, and secondly, we do not have enough time to review and comment as a delegation. Thank you.
Okay, just any questions from council on that? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Okay, we'll look to Brad Gowland to come forward, please, and speak. And new information, please.
New or different?
Well, different would be probably new from what you presented on last time. So.
Okay, I thought it was different than what Chelsea had presented.
Yeah, no, new
Okay.
information from your last presentation.
Same idea. Friday at 4:20 is not any time to receive notification that something like this is going to happen tonight. We wrote to council. Mr. Colossa wrote back on Sunday night about 9:30. I responded back. He said that he was going to try to get us the information. The information still hasn't been provided for the new reports. What the neighborhood is wanting, one, there's only half the neighborhood here tonight, is a deferral on this matter. One, because we've not seen the new documents, the new reports that have been redone. I guess it was this spring that they were redone. They were mentioned in the report that was produced by Ms. Ivins. And, you know, just a couple of questions. Why this never made it to a planning committee meeting prior to tonight? And if it did, why weren't we notified? So essentially, looking for notification, looking for information so that we can discuss this as, you know, as educated as the developers and if anybody else that's involved in this matter. You know, we're participants in this process. We should be given the same rights, the same opportunities as everyone else around the horseshoe, at the tables beside me. We need to know.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from council? Okay, seeing none, thank you. And the third delegation is Doug Buter from SAW Developments, please.
I have a brief statement. Thank you, Council. My name is Doug Buter. My wife Andrea and I are the owners of SAW Developments and the proposed subdivision development on Marshfield Drive. We are Fleeters. We've grown up in 3 generations here in Wainfleet, and the property has been in the family for 15 years. In growing up in Wainfleet, I recall a busy school system and an active sports community built by the residents of this community. That is at risk today. We need growth to maintain what Wainfleet is and what it should be for generations to come. Not a Smithville, not a Bimbrook, but large country lots matching the surrounding homes in hamlet areas. This development accomplishes that and meets the criteria of the official plans of the province, the region, and the township, as the planning report states. We have modified the plan after the public meetings and regional concerns that has led us to maintain a larger woodlot to support environmental issues. We have contracted professional engineers, environmental consultants, planners, and hydrogeologists, all with a professional responsibility to develop and create a sustainable infrastructure in the hamlet of Wainfleet. We will build 13 homes to support this community and strengthen the economy of Wainfleet. A small group of people oppose any growth in Wainfleet. However, the majority of Fleeters support it. Please vote for this 13-home community as recommended by the planner of Wainfleet, the region, and the province. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Okay, we look for a motion to receive all 3 of those presentations, please. Councillor McClellan, seconder. Councillor Gilmore, all in favor. And those 3 are received. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on to a public meeting. And the purpose of a public meeting, in accordance with the Planning Act, a public meeting is held to present information regarding the proposed official plan amendment to the public and for council to receive comments that the public and members of council may have. Staff and council will not make a recommendation or decision on the proposed official plan amendment at a public meeting. A planning report will be brought forward by staff and considered by council at a later date. As a member of the public, you are welcome to request to be notified of any future public or council meetings. Please provide your contact information on the sign-in sheet located at the back and of the council chambers. And please be advised that the sign-in information will form part of the public record for this file. And I'll look to the planner for the purpose and details of the application.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm going to turn it over to David Riley. He's from SGL Planning, and he has been hired to assist the township with this project. So I'll turn it over to Dave.
Thank you, Sarah, and good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Dave Riley. I'm with SGL Planning, planning consultant for the township. We were involved in creation of the township's current official plan. And I should clarify for the public and members of council, this is a township-initiated official plan amendment. And it's to address a little bit of a unique situation that relates back to when the official plan was approved, when it was originally adopted by the township. Some of the hamlets were slightly larger than they are now. And through modifications to the official plan, the ultimate approval of those hamlet boundaries resulted in slightly smaller hamlet areas. What's unique about the situation is that those lands that were within that draft hamlet boundary and now are not within the hamlet are left without a land use designation. So they're in the agricultural area, they're in the countryside, and therefore the options are either agricultural area or rural area, and that is what this official plan amendment is to do. So I briefly went over this slide, but just as a recap, in 2010, the official plan was adopted. There were several appeals, and ultimately in 2014, the OMB approved the official plan, except for the hamlet boundaries. That was one of the things that was held back. In January 2016, the appeal with respect to the hamlet boundaries was resolved, and those lands that I was referring to, which are outside of Wellandport, Chambers Corner, Wellandport, Austrian Corners, and Chambers Corners, were left without a designation. So in January 2017, some representatives on behalf of some of these property owners that own these properties brought this to the attention of the township, and it was a couple months later that council directed staff to initiate this process and direction for this official plan amendment. So just to go through them briefly, we have Wellandport on the screen here. I'm going to ask for a color. What color are those? It's gray. So the gray, I'm colorblind, I apologize. But the gray properties at the bottom there that were not actually removed from the hamlet because they were never within. They were within a draft hamlet boundary. But for the purposes of tonight, I'm going to use the word removed. Based on agricultural work that was done as part of the official plan review, these would be agricultural area designations based on the soil classifications. The owner has requested a rural area designation and has submitted a number of supporting studies that we're looking at in evaluating whether these lands should be agricultural and rural. The next are the properties, the northeast corner of Chambers Corners. And again, these were identified as they would be within the agricultural area designation pursuant to the background work that was done for the official plan. Austrian Corners, the southeast corner down there, you can see there's a portion of the two properties there. Similarly, they would be within an agricultural designation, but the owner has requested rural and again has submitted some supporting studies, which we're looking at and will be commenting on in the staff report. And I should have mentioned at the beginning, part of the council direction was also to include within this amendment, this township-initiated amendment, property on Tunnicliffe Road, and we should consider whether those lands, a portion of those lands, should be redesignated from agricultural area, which they are currently designated, to rural area. And for this one, there have been a number of studies submitted as well, which are under review. So the next steps will be to continue our review and to come back to council with a recommendation report, and any comments or questions can be directed to Sarah, and Sarah will keep me informed through if there's any questions or comments from the public or council. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions from council? Councillor McCollum?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what is the difference between rural and agricultural, the uses that can be done?
So the overall in rural, you're allowed to have, rural and agricultural both permit agricultural uses on broad scale. For these properties in particular, because of minimum distance separation from existing dwellings in the hamlet, it's likely that the purpose to redesignate to rural would be for the purposes of creating additional lots. So in a rural designation, if the lot existed prior to 2006, I believe, you're allowed to create 3 additional lots from that parcel, a maximum of 3. In an agricultural designation, you're not permitted to create, lot creation is not permitted.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from council? Okay, thank you. Seeing none. Requests for comment, questions, or input from the gallery. Now is the time for the public to have their opportunity to come up to the mic and speak on this issue. Okay, ma'am, come ahead. Thank you. And just state your name and your address, please.
I am Tina Evers. I live at 52015 Regional Road 24, so just northeast of Chambers Corners. A portion of my property has been removed from the hamlet boundaries, and I just want to comment. I know it will be agricultural because of where I am and because of what other agricultural businesses are around me, but at last year's meeting, I received a letter stating that this would be happening, and I went and spoke to Miss Ivans, and at that time, she said that you were looking at making my property agricultural. It's probably it's my own fault that I did not ask whether or not there are other designations that I could have looked into. So when I received this last letter, a week and a half or so ago, then I called Miss Iverson, and I am thinking I would have appreciated being told that I could have asked for my property to be designated as rural area. But the time was too short for me to do that. I didn't realize that if I was going to ask for that, that I had to have a plan in place. So that's just the comment I want to make. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Would anybody else like a chance to speak to this issue? Thank you. Just your name and address, please.
My name is Diane Smith-Coomber. I live at 73965.
Excuse me, can you just pull the mic a little closer? Great, thank you. And state your name again, please.
Diane Smith-Coomber, and I live at 73965 Regional Road 45. My question is just to find out where is 73845 on the map when I'm looking at it. Is that right next to me, or I don't know where that is, that lot? Can you identify that for me on the map?
Yeah, Sarah, could you speak to that, please?
And if I'm understanding this correctly, since I'm in the gray area, the township is proposing that this remain agricultural. That means no lots can be put on. What about, I've heard that we can have like a granny house put on our own property. Is that something that can happen?
Thank you. Look to the planner to speak to that.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, so first question, so the address you mentioned is to the west, so from what I understand, you're at the corner.
I'm on the more rectangle piece, that right on the line, so to the right.
To the right, okay. So the property to your left, that kind of goes around your property, so that's included within that address. But only the area in the gray was in the draft hamlet boundaries, and so that's the area that we're looking to assign a land use designation to. Everything outside of that gray area already has a land use designation, which is agricultural area currently.
So 73987 is not in that gray area.
So the actual physical house associated with that is to the east, but the gray area is part of that property.
Okay, maybe I'm not understanding.
So it's a large property that kind of goes around your property.
All the white area
Right.
around my property? Yeah. Sorry.
So this is a larger property.
Gotcha.
And so from what I'm understanding, this is your property here.
Correct.
So the address is associated with dwelling over here, but this is still one property. So,
Okay.
but we're only talking about the gray area and assigning a designation to that area.
And that gray area will be, we're looking at agricultural.
That's correct, yes.
So part 2 of my question then?
So you wanted like a garden suite on your
Yeah,
property?
let's say I have my adult.
Can you speak into the mic?
If one of my adult children were to move back with me, I would let them live in my house, and then I would have like a little house on the same property.
So there's a couple of different ways you can go about that. There's a secondary suite, which you can do as an addition to your home or in a detached structure. If you want a temporary structure, you can go through a temporary use bylaw to get a garden suite on your property.
Okay, but does it change any designations
No.
at that point? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And anyone else would like to speak to this? Thank you. Please state your name and your address.
I'm Marguerite Fonseca, and I'm from 73987 Regional
Sorry,
Road.
can you spell that for us, please? Sorry.
Marguerite, and the last name is Fonsecca. And I'm from 73987 Regional Road 45, relatively new to the neighborhood. So I'm new to the whole process. And I see that, I don't know if it's the whole lot, but I see my number up for a rural designation. So I'd like to review part of that. I do understand what it means, but again, like the lady before me, I'd like to know if we change use or we need to use part of the property for, even though it's deemed residential, can we use it for extensions or any other purpose? So that's my question.
Okay, and you're speaking about on your existing property.
That is correct.
Okay, so that would be to put an addition on would be like a building permit application, and you would do that through our planning branch and building department, within the confines of what you already own, yes.
Okay. But if the designation changes, say it's not permitted rural and deemed agricultural, are those things still allowed?
Yeah, perhaps, Sarah, can you speak to that, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So regardless if you're in the agricultural area or the rural area, if the primary use of your property is a single detached dwelling, you're permitted to do additions. That is a permitted use. So you would be permitted to do an addition to your home or construct a detached garage and that sort of thing, as long as it met the zoning setbacks and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else wishing to speak to this, please come forward. State your name and address, please, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Glenn Cook, and I'm at 11673 Burnaby Road at Osterham Corners. Could we have that picture? I'm the property owner that owns the gray area, along also with the commercial area beside it, which is in Hamlet. Which is that piece right there. So this is the piece here that is being as non-designated. You created a timeline. Back in 2009, I applied for an application for planned subdivision and zoning. I was approached by the planner of Township of Wainfleet and the regional of Niagara, and they asked me to withdraw that application because they were going to include it with the official plan in 2010. Part of their mandate was to look at the hamlets and create real borders, boundary lines, not boundary lines with no physical conditions. And you'll notice right there, that's a boundary line with no physical condition. When the official plan went through, my request was reneged, and the hamlets were created as they are today. I was asked at that time to do a justification report of what the hamlet would look like if it went to Moore Road and then north of Highway 3. So I did provide that, and the regional council and the town council approved the zoning, but the province, when it went to OMB hearing, appealed it based on a commercial property north of the property that's non-designated, which is my property. That I have a construction business there. We did a noise report, ag soil report, and various other reports that were submitted, and they were submitted for place of discussion. To date, that discussion hasn't occurred. The staff planner has indicated that they're not making a recommendation tonight for the designation, and yet on the notice they are seeking agricultural designation on my property. I object to that designation. I know with the timelines that has gone through with what I've been dealing with this property, changes of the Planning Act has changed considerably, and now I'm only obligated to either go agricultural or rural, and so now I'm saying I would like to have that property as rural. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you. And anyone else like to speak to this? Please state your name and address.
Ted Hessel, 73272 Robertson Road, Wallingport. Okay, Mayor and Council. Yeah, some of it might be a little bit of a repetitive what Glenn said, but we are here at a public meeting, and staff has said in the public information report that they will receive information and will not be making any recommendations or decisions at this public meeting. But yet, in the same report, they are, in quotes, seeking a designation of agricultural area on on all three properties. That's the Chambers Corners, the Osterham Corners, and the Wellandport area. So yeah, this has me a little bit confused. And I also object to the designation of agriculture to these areas. When the township did their official plan, they went through an extensive consultation with the community, and there was a general consensus that the 3 properties in questions would be appropriate to be in the hamlet. Both the township and the region saw no issues with it at the time, and it approved it to be part of the hamlets. We are here tonight because at the moment, these lands have no designation. We are here asking that you apply the rural designation to these properties. In the case of the Wellenport area, which affects my property, the province had some issues with the provincially significant wetlands and the MDS. I have taken the incentive to have an environmental impact study and a minimal distance separation study done, and they have shown that there would be no negative impact. The Wellenport parcel would be reasonable parcel to have real designation. It's adjacent to the hamlet of Wellenport, has 3 institutions, churches right next to it. It would be like an infill since there are residential lots directly east and west of this area. This area is not a desirable land for agricultural due to its size. The size of equipment and the sprays and the chemicals that we need to use to control weeds and pests makes this parcel unfavorable to farm because of the proximity to neighbors and their properties. And this land would take very little resources from Wainfleet because it has no infrastructure or maintenance costs as of Wainfleet roads because it has frontage on all regional roads. Therefore, I ask that you give these lands the real designation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, council? Seeing none, thank you very much. Are there any other folks that wish to speak to this? Thank you. Name and address, please.
Good evening, Gerald Stahl, 11274 Golf Course Road. Mr. Mayor, council, staff, residents. I'm just here to ask a clarification. Councillor McClellan already asked the question I was already looking for clarification on, which was in regards to the difference between the designation of agricultural and rural. I want to go one step further. The property I purchased a few years ago, from what I understand, used to be designated agricultural, and then it was subdivided into a 1 hectare lot. And from what I recall or I'm aware of, it's now deemed A2, I believe, agriculture in transition. And I just wonder how this applies in regards to this scenario between the difference between a rural designation and an agricultural designation.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, could you just speak to that briefly, please?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So as Dave explained, so in both the rural and the agricultural designations, agricultural uses are permitted, broad spectrum of agricultural uses. The difference being that rural does allow for some limited lot creation, subject to specific policy requirements. So that is the main difference when you're looking at a rural versus agricultural designation. In terms of how that impacts your property, I'd have to look up your property and see what it's currently zoned. I'm not familiar with your property, but I can get in contact with you if you'd like to have a further discussion on that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, seeing none. Okay, go ahead, sir. State your name and address, please.
Yeah, it's Perry Clamanig, 51250 Tunnicliffe Road. Yeah, I guess I'm here to defend or clarify my property on Tunnicliffe Road. You give the impression that it's 50 acres of agricultural land in that drawing. It's 25 acres of agricultural land. It's about 16 acres of wetland and forest that I've partnered with the Conservation Authority and Ducks Unlimited to enhance over the last 10 years. I've been on the property 45 years. The 25 acres that's farmable is being farmed, and it's going to stay that way. The neighbors are using it, Mike Hazinga and his brother-in-law. That piece that's represented in gray there is what I presently live on. That's lawn, landscape gardens, ponds, and everything else. I'm getting a little older, and the wife is, we're not interested in maintaining 7 acres of lawn and gardens anymore. I'd like to designate that, have that designation changed. it's probably big enough that I could do 2 lots there. I might give one to my son, or I'd build a smaller place and retire there. I'd like to maintain the properties because that's what I've been doing for 43 years. And then, in light of what else has gone on in the area, over those 43 years, I've seen subdivisions, I've seen testamentary devises, I've seen all the rules broken and changed for special interest groups, and yet the average fella can't seem to do anything. The property that we're arguing over, we seem to have, that seems to be such a point of contention as far as agricultural land, compromises about 2 acres of what's left there. So I've got overhead drawings and stuff that I can hand out. I handed it out to the previous council, but I guess it's pretty controversial. They've all been replaced. I guess that's it. But I just want to make sure that that gives a bit of a false impression that I'm trying to hack up a piece of agricultural land, and it's far from that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, seeing none. Would anyone else like to speak to this public meeting issue this evening? Anyone else wish to speak to it? Okay, we'll look to the planner for the next steps, please.
So as Dave mentioned, we'll come back with a recommendation report regarding the official plan amendment. So if anyone wishes to be notified of the passing of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment or of the official plan amendment or refusal of the request to amend the official plan, you must make a written request to the clerk of the Township of Wainfleet. The sign-in sheet in the back also has the ability, if you wanted to be notified when that recommendation report comes forward, to please sign in there, and we'll make sure that we do that. So if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the corporation of the Township of Wainfleet before the bylaw, official plan amendment is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the Township of Wainfleet to the local planning appeal tribunal. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submission to the township before the official plan amendment is passed, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the local planning appeal tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so.
Okay, thank you. So just a brief to reiterate, if you wish to be kept apprised, make sure you sign the form at the back there with your name and your contact information, and you will be kept apprised of the status of this public meeting. So that concludes this public meeting. Thank you. Okay, I'll just move on to a few brief mayor's announcements. Yesterday I was at the forum presented by the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Steve Clark, and it was very interesting to learn where the province is going in regards to housing, the housing crisis that exists, that sort of thing. So that was yesterday morning. Tomorrow morning I'll be attending a tour of Brock, part of Brock's newest facility, followed by a tour of outpatient facility at Hotel du Shaver, which people in Wainfleet do access those facilities. On Thursday morning, I'll be at the Police Service Board meeting in Niagara Falls. And Friday, I'll be attending the World Hepatitis Day Community Awareness event at Montebello Park in St. Catharines. And in August, I will be away attending the Canadian Association of Police Governance Conference. It's in Calgary. And then right after that is the AMO conference where we get the opportunity to meet and speak with ministers of issues relevant to Wainfleet. Regional Council will meet next Wednesday on August 15th. The next NPCA board meeting will be Wednesday, August the 21st. And please note that we have no regularly scheduled meetings of council during the month of August. The next regular meeting will be held on Tuesday, September 10th. And that concludes the mayor's comments. Okay, we look to adoption of the minutes. Minutes from the regular meeting of council held July the 9th, 2019, and minutes of the emergency meeting of council held July 16th, 2019. Is there any discussion from council on there? Any issues, corrections, amendments? Is there any objection to passing that? Okay, those minutes are passed. Thank you. Okay, so I know the interest here this evening with the number of people in the gallery is regarding two planning reports, municipal responsibility agreement for Lakewood Beach development and the draft plan for by SAW Developments Incorporated. So if there's no disagreement with anyone, they're on the bottom of the list, but perhaps we can move them to the front and to meet everybody's interest right off. Any disagreements? Okay, seeing none. So we'll look. Okay, so we'll do PSR 007 2019 Municipal Responsibility Agreement for Lakewood Beach Development. And we'll look to the planner to speak to that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So one of the conditions of draft approval for the Lakewood development is the execution of a municipal responsibility agreement. And that's between the Niagara region and the developer. And that's for the on-site water and wastewater systems. So the township doesn't have the staff or resources to operate such facilities. So when that condition was put in place, it was specifically put in place so that the agreement would be between the region and the developer, because the region has the resources and the staff to be able to operate and maintain such a system. Through that preparation by the region and negotiation with the developer, the region felt that the township should be added as a party, and that was only to provide clarity around collection of fees for the water and wastewater systems from the individual unit owners. My report outlines the 4 paragraphs in which obligations are imposed on the township, and again, that deals with the billing of fees to these unit owners, collecting that money and remitting those funds back to the region. So through the agreement, we have the ability to charge administrative fees for that, to cover staff time to do the billing, recuperate that recover that money and send it back off to the region. So the agreement has been reviewed by the township solicitor, and they identified no issues with the inclusion of the township as a party to the agreement. And again, our sole responsibility comes with the billing and collection of funds and remitting that back to the region. We will not be responsible for operating such a system in the event that it defaults. So in my report, I have attached a bylaw that authorizes the mayor and the clerk to execute this agreement.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from councillors? Councillor McClellan.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Sarah. This is strictly, we do billing. We are not obligated to supply water. We are not obligated to supply sewers. It's, we do the billing for the region of Niagara. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Recommendation is that planning staff report PSR 007 2019 be received, that council endorse being added as a party to the municipal responsibility agreement between the region of Niagara and Lakewood Beach properties, and that council adopt the bylaw attached as Appendix A to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute the municipal responsibility agreement for the Lakewood Beach development on behalf of the Township of Wainfleet. And this satisfies number 34 in the 61 conditions as listed in the document for Lakewood. Motion for that, please. Councillor McClellan, seconder. Councillor Gilmore, all in favor? And that is carried. Okay, the next item, Sarah, will you speak to this, please? The draft plan of SAW developments.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to all of council. So this report is regarding a zoning bylaw amendment application and draft plan of subdivision application for lands on Marshfield Drive. So the original plan was to propose to create 14 lots for single detached dwellings, 1 block for water for fire suppression, and 2 blocks for the proposed roads. The zoning bylaw amendment proposes to remove the hazard zone and lift the holding provision. We had a public meeting on these applications back in January, and the initial comments from agencies identified concerns with the environmental impact study, which required further information and study from the applicant. So that additional information was supplied by the applicant, and that included an addendum to the environmental impact study and a supplemental planning justification report. So as a result, the plan of subdivision was altered to go from 14 lots to 13 lots, and this reduction was required so that the revised limits of the environmental conservation area would be contained wholly on Lot 10, and that's to satisfy provincial, regional, and township policy requirements, as lot lines are not able to go through that feature. In terms of the zoning bylaw amendment, as I mentioned, it's proposing to remove the hazard zone and a holding provision. In 1995, this property went through a zoning amendment process, and that was to rezone the property from a development D zone to a residential R1, with the inclusion of a holding provision to permit future development on the property. The requirements for lifting that holding provision included future development either through individual severances or a plan of subdivision to satisfy the health department regarding lot size and provision of private services and provision of sufficient drainage. So map 7 of the bylaw was updated as that application was approved. However, the mapping showed an H rather than a H in brackets, which is typically used to identify a holding provision. That's particularly important to differentiate because the bylaw also has a H as hazard zone. So just putting an H on it on its own, one can infer that there was a hazard placed on it. So in this application, we're requesting that that be removed because based on the research, it was never intended to be a hazard zone, as there are no flooding risks associated with any nearby watercourses. And through the review of the proposed lots, there's 2 lots that have a reduced lot frontage. So I've included that in the zoning amendment, so that's lots 4 and 10. And we've also included a reduction in front and rear yard setbacks for lot 10, and that's due to its configuration. We wanted to make sure there was a sufficient building envelope outside of that environmental conservation area. And the zoning amendment also introduces an environmental conservation overlay, and that's on lot 10, and that's to cover the portion of the woodlot that is to remain in an environmental conservation area designation. In terms of agency comments, they're detailed in my report, but there's no objection, provided a number of conditions of draft approval are included in the decision. And those draft conditions from the commenting agencies, as well as from various township departments, is included in Appendix C of my report. Since releasing the report, I did have a discussion with Mr. Buter regarding condition number 18. That requires that private services be installed in accordance with the recommendations of the hydrogeological study. And that hydrogeological study specified raised beds for the septic systems. Mr. Buter has indicated that they're looking into alternative technologies, and they didn't want to be limited to just raised beds, as there might be other technologies that achieve the same goal, but based on the way the condition is worded in my report, he would be limited to a raised bed only. So he proposed some additional wording. So the condition number 18, that the owner shall install sustainable private services in accordance with the recommendations in Section 7 of the hydrogeological assessment prepared by Terra Dynamics Consulting, dated June 18th, or otherwise satisfactory to the township. And again, this allows him to look at other technologies that achieve the same goal, but isn't tied down to a raised septic bed traditional system. So my report goes into detail about a number of policies. In conclusion, I've recommended approval, draft approval, subject to the conditions in Appendix C with that revised condition number 18. But if council has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay, thank you. So any questions from council? Councillor Cridlin?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Ms. Ivins. I notice it's now in phases, which is a positive change, and I just wondered if the applicant and the township want to extend it beyond the phases. I think it was 3 years. Can it do so if they jointly agree to do that, or is it 3 years, or is there a finite timeline on that phase? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Cridlin. So that 3 years lapsing provision is only the period in which they have to fulfill those conditions. So through the negotiation of a subdivision agreement, we could specify how long each phasing could take. We haven't had that discussion with the applicant as of yet because we haven't negotiated an agreement yet. But that 3-year provision that you noticed in the conditions is just for fulfillment of the conditions itself, not for the phasing.
Okay, any other discussion by councillors? Questions? Okay, seeing none, the recommendations are that planning staff report PSR 008-2019 be received, that draft plan of subdivision application P012018W for lands described as concession 3, part of lot 18, RP 59R9242, and parts 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 14, 12, Township of Wainfleet, be approved for the reasons outlined in PSR 008/2019 and subject to the conditions of draft approval in Appendix C. That zoning bylaw amendment application Z04-2018W for lands described as concession 3, part of lot 18, RP 59R9242, parts 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 14, 12, Township of Wainfleet, be approved for reasons outlined in PSR 008-2019. That the zoning bylaw amendment attached as Appendix D be adopted, and that the applications are deemed to be consistent with the provincial policy statement of 2014 and other matters of provincial interest. You have a mover for that, please? Councillor McClellan moves it, second. Councillor Gilmore, all in favor? And that is approved. We can take, if the gallery was going to empty, or are you going to stay? It's noisy. If everybody leaves, we'll take a 2-minute recess, but if everybody's staying put, we can carry on. Okay, we'll take a 2-minute recess. Okay, thank you. We'll reconvene and we'll move into our staff reports. And the first staff report will be on the cancellation, reduction, or refund of property tax for the 2018-2019 taxation years. And I'll look to our treasurer to speak to that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is just an application for a write-off of assessment due to a structure fire that happened December 28, 2017. So it's for the taxation year 2018 and 2019.
Thank you. And just for the public, and if they're wondering what the cancellation of tax is, an example of that is a house that's burned down and is no longer occupied, and so the taxes are prorated and refunded on that. So that's an example of why we do that. So, okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, seeing none. Mover, Councillor Gilmore, seconder, Councillor Van Vliet, all in favor, and that report is received. And the building report, June 2019. Nothing, there's any questions from councillors on the building report? Okay, seeing none, have a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor McClellan, Councillor Cridlin, seconder. The report be received for information. All in favor, and that is approved. We look to our bylaw officer for the review of enforcement bylaw policy.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. This report was brought forward on July 9th as a updated enforcement policy. It was brought forward to council, and it was then deferred because all of council should have input. So we're just bringing it forward to review that and for council to, if they have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions by councillors? Councillor McClellan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I am still not happy with it being complaint-driven for reactions. Under the options, we are still going with complaint-driven. We have staff driving around town. If they see something, they should be able to stop and report it themselves. They shouldn't count on a neighbor to rat out a neighbor, basically, right?
Can you speak to that, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In the past, the township has had part-time enforcement and shared services. I'm the first full-time bylaw officer, I believe, in quite some time. So it would, I'm trying to find, this is the most fair process in our discussions with SLT and other review of other bylaws that other municipalities do. It is in line with the municipal best practice. That's why we recommended those options.
Thank you. And on the new amended policy, page 2, C, second last paragraph, it does state that an officer may initiate an investigation into matters with or without a complaint form. Safety of residents shall take precedence over all other considerations. So that little piece is in there, which does allow the self-initiated work. Any other questions? Councillor Cridlin?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you, and thank you for deferring, I suppose. I don't see anything driving this change. So it's an idea. I think it's great that we're talking about it, testing to see if there's an appetite to spend more money, do more policing. But in this realm, I mean, if it was fire or if it was building inspections and things, which is covered, for the area that we're covering, there's no evidence that the complaint-driven is not working. As the staff person has mentioned, it's still relatively new. We're very, very busy with the number of complaints we are dealing with. So if we go to step 2 or step 3, there's absolutely a cost. So I would say we can certainly bring this back in a couple of years, maybe with a bit of data that suggests that there's something driving it. But for me, I'm quite happy to leave things the way they are for the cost that we are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Curlin. Councillor Van Vliet.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I actually received a phone call this morning about this, and the resident wanted to know if somebody had complained, wanted us to be kind of like the police. So residents are wondering why we'd want to go in this direction as well. So I would agree with Councillor Quinlan that we keep it complaint-driven.
Okay, any other questions from council? Okay, seeing none. I'll ask the CAO wishes to speak to this as well.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just one other comment regarding the draft policy that's before you. On page 3 of 3, in, I guess it's paragraph D, the very last sentence of paragraph D, before you get to a effective date. Staff have been reviewing that, and we actually had a pre-meeting with the mayor as well. And we noticed that there is a bit of confusion that might arise if you read that last sentence of that paragraph with the beginning part of that paragraph. So at this time, staff are recommending that that last sentence, beginning with the word accordingly, be removed, and just the main body of the paragraph remain. So we think that will help clarify the process and help clearly enunciate, if you will, the direction that the township is going.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on this? Okay, seeing none. Recommendation from staff is that BSR 014-2019 be received and that the amended bylaw enforcement policy be adopted as by council as outlined in this report. You have a mover for that, please? You have another question?
I just needed to be clear. So the direction is no change based on what we're talking about, with the updated policy change, the updated wording that you've got in there.
No, the recommendation from staff is that we go to the new model, right, where it's named in here that there can be self-initiated work done by the bylaw officer. That's the recommendation. So we're either voting to uphold that or voting to oppose it. Stay status quo.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead, Councillor Gilmore.
Well, we wouldn't, it's not necessarily status quo because there's 3 choices. So at the moment, you're stating that if we would vote in the affirmative, we would be choosing option 2. So if we're not happy with option 2, then we would need to defeat that and go another route. But because three is on the list, so it can't be. If we're going to go with this approach, then we'll decide how we feel about option 2, and then see where we go from there.
I'll look for the CAO to speak to that, please.
Again, for clarification of what is being proposed in the recommendation, Appendix B, which is the revised policy, which allows the enforcement officer, if he observes a situation that represents a health, safety, or other threat to persons or property, to commence an investigation, along with the removal of the last sentence of paragraph D, which I just referred to on page 3 of 3. So that is the staff recommendation. It's basically the existing policy with a little bit of additional ability for the officer to deal with issues of observed, where the officer observes a threat to somebody's health, safety, or the safety of a person's property. So you don't have to wait for a complaint in those circumstances.
Councillor Gilmore?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering if we can set a timeline and run this as a pilot for a while and see how it goes. I'm marginally comfortable with going this route, although I have some reservations. There's a lot of it depends on discretionary judgment, which can be a problem in some instances. So I think I'm comfortable with it if we set it out as a pilot for a period of maybe 6 months to a year, and then review it. As long as it's not etched in stone, that'd be. I'd like to go that direction. I don't know what my colleagues feel like.
Okay, thank you. Exactly the sentiments I had when I read this over, and a week ago sat with staff and said I was not content with it as written. And one of the answers to that is to develop a standard operating procedure, a set of rules that the bylaw officer will follow so that self-initiated files, investigations follow a protocol. And that protocol would have the greatest respect for the homeowner, where you go to the door, you knock on the door, that kind of thing. So that SOP, they're called, Standard Operating Procedures, they're not developed, or we didn't get into it, but that is one way, to your point, Councillor Gilmore, about discretion. We would write out a Standard Operating Procedure which would address any flagrant abuse of the system as it exists. So in the sense of looking after life and limb and serious incidents, the bylaw officer could initiate that investigation, but would have to follow that standard operating procedure to ensure that we're not trampling on people's rights and that sort of thing. Because one of the things I had an issue with was that you could just walk into somebody's yard and look around, and to me that's just right against the Charter of Rights. And so the standard operating procedure would address all that and would control that, and the officer would have to work to that standard operating procedure. So that would be very much limit the freedom of the bylaw officer. They would have to follow our SOPs as developed, but they would also then control it and allow the other aspect of being able, when you do see a really bad hazard, of being able to go in, knock on the door, and ask and start to begin working with those people to fix that hazard, so it speaks to public safety. So that's one of the other issues we spoke about. So, any other discussion? Councillor Cridlin?
Thank you, Mayor. Again, I'm just not sure what's driving any kind of change. So is there some examples of where we're talking only about the Clean Yards bylaw that this will apply to? Okay. Could maybe then through to the CAO, if you could just cover a little bit what this is covering. So it's not building code, it's not fire. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. One of the drivers behind the update to the bylaw, as the bylaw enforcement officer mentioned earlier, the original policy and procedures that were adopted by council many years ago were adopted really prior to us having a bylaw officer. And if you go through the original policy, you'll note that there are references to the chief building official as being the primary overseer, if you will, of the bylaw enforcement function. It refers to a variety of other situations that were in place in Wainfleet at the time, but now that we have a full-time officer, there are some basic housekeeping changes that need to be made to the policy to bring it to 2019. The other element, again, as noted, the only really new element that's being proposed is the whole being able to react to health and safety concerns without the need of a formal process. And again, from a staff perspective, we thought that was the sort of middle ground between a fully complaint-driven system, which means if an officer sees a dangling tree branch hanging over somebody's house, that belongs to somebody else's tree, the officer has to wait for a complaint, versus the officer being able to go and knock on the door and say, hey, your tree branch is about to fall on that guy's house. Can you do something about it? So that's really sort of the one sort of new element to the policy that's being proposed. And as the mayor said, one of the other things that will be developed to supplement the policy is an additional series of standard operating procedures, SOPs, which will help build the full framework for bylaw enforcement, but that's sort of stage 2 once we get the policy in place.
Okay, any further discussion on that? Councillor Gilmore?
Thank you, Mayor, to the CAO. Well, what would be the limitation to getting the rules done before we approve the enforcement? I think it's a great idea. I just I don't like to pass it and then we find out what the rules are. It reminds me of refereeing.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess the big limitation is that the meeting was just 2 weeks ago and we haven't had time to actually sit down. I know that the manager of the enforcement services, the bylaw officer, and I had a meeting today where we were talking about SOPs moving forward, and we do have sort of a framework, if you will, started, but they're just not done yet. So again, we're at the direction of council with regard to those. Generally, SOPs are more of an administrative step-by-step process as opposed to a broader policy-type document, which is something that council adopts. And SOPs are more of a, again, an internal administrative function, but we would be more than happy to pull those together and get them to council as you wish.
So I'm thinking at this time that we defer this. Councillor Gilmore, sorry.
No, that's fine. You can do. I was just going to suggest that. Yeah, there's no imminent hurry. I mean, the last deferral was so that Councillor Crillon could be here. If you could have this for the September meeting or October, whenever, just pick the time, and then we'll go with it. I'd like to see the discretionary rules in place before we move on with this. So, yeah, I'll make the motion to defer it back to staff until such time as the SOP for this particular policy is in place. Like, I'm not, just let's do this one. The other ones will just fall in order.
Okay, so the motion is to defer this back to another meeting, and to have a seconder on that. Councillor McClellan, and all in favor, and that is carried. So that is deferred. Okay, moving on to our drainage report, drainage program 2019 mid-year update, and I'll look to our drainage superintendent to speak to that, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, as requested at the March 5th council meeting, this report provides an update on the drainage program. Our maintenance started a little later than usual due to the wet weather. We've cleaned North Forks and Zavitz Ram Drain and started on Stazer just yesterday. We still have the McCallum, the Biederman, and Big Forks to clean this year. We've done quite a bit of coordination with Port Coburn, dealing with high lake levels on the Eagle Marsh Drain, which has created a bit of a backup in the lakeshore area. And a lot of time has been spent on our engineering report updates, which will continue. We just held our Bridgewater Drain Section 78 on-site meeting on July 10th. The Indian Creek Section 78 on-site meeting has been scheduled for August 15th, and the Consolidated South Wainfleet Section 76 info session has been scheduled for September 24th. If the weather stays dry and we get rolling a little faster, we'll start to look forward to our 2020 maintenance list as well.
Okay, thank you. Can we just not chatter in the front there? It's a little distracting to some of us can hear it, and it throws us off a bit, so thank you very much. Okay, questions on that report? Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor, to Mr. Jemison. Big Forks is going to be done from 27 to the Wainfleet-Dunville town line, is that, or just a portion of it?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, through some of the environmental regulations that are in place, we have forecasted a partial bottom clean out around the major intersections. So it's going to total roughly around only 1,500 meters. That whole drain itself is about 10,000 meters. So we met with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and pinpointed a few spots where we'll get into, but it won't be a full bottom clean out like we did the full brushing last year. It'll just be at localized locations.
Okay, so if I can continue, so when you suggest that it's 11,000 linear feet, we're not really going to do that much of Big Forks? Is that?
No, so through you, Mr. Mayor, so the 11,000 linear feet is the total distance that we are cleaning this year. In linear feet, the total distance of the drain is much greater than that.
Okay.
It'll be cleaned out in roughly 300 feet sections wherever another drain comes into the Big Forks, where there will be more sedimentation.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the drainage report? Mover for that, please. Councillor Van Vliet, seconder. Councillor Cridlin, all in favor? And that's carried. Okay, moving on to the fire staff report. I look to our deputy chief to speak to anything there that you would like to speak to, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's the first report there is the 2019 second quarter Fire Emergency Services Review. Looking for any questions from council. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of that report? Councillor Cridlin?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Again, it's great to see these reports, especially what it is you're planning to do. There's one I just noticed, and I haven't seen these before, but the open air events that or incidents, fire, unauthorized open air complaint. Is that sort of like a regular number that we're seeing, or I guess I'm just looking for, is there an opportunity for outreach in this particular area if it's new or different than before patterns? Thank you.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Cridlin. So you're asking if this is an abnormally high number. I don't know if I can answer that. We do have many unauthorized open air complaints every year, and we usually go do an education piece and let them know that permits are required, and it's usually well accepted. So, thank you.
Any other questions, Councillor McClellan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the one thing that kind of jumps out me on your inspection program, we still have over half the people that don't have working fire alarms in town and carbon monoxide.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McClellan, yes, that's very shocking numbers. We are actually doing a blitz next Monday. We're going to go out on a training night and hit some of the areas in Wainfleet and promote working smoke alarms. In our public education program as well, we are constantly talking about working smoke alarms. Yeah, because the results can be devastating if they're not compliant.
One more question for you. Are most of these that are not working, are they just battery ones, or are they electric battery that are out of date? Or I know most of them, like in my house, they're all interwired together. They have a 10-year life, and then you have to change them out. Is that where you're finding your problem, or?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah. So it's a variety, but most of them are the battery-operated ones. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? So, Councillor, or the CAO wish to speak.
Just a comment, as this is the sort of second quarter or mid-year report, I just wanted to extend real congratulations to the fire department for everything that they've been doing, both in training, in responding, in participating in public education opportunities, getting the fire department up to a point where they are now, and they've come a long, long way. They've done an incredible job, and I think it's worth noting. Job well done.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. And just to echo that, yes, fire department's been very busy, and we're doing great work. So the time and money and training that we're investing is paying off. So good work. Sorry, I got carried away there. We get a motion to receive that report, please. Councillor McClellan, seconder. Councillor Gilmore, all in favor, and that's carried. Okay, we look to FS Fire Report 11-2019. I'm going to ask the Deputy Chief to speak to that again, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to all council. Yeah, this is the report for the radio communication equipment, the user gear that we would like to upgrade in the fire department that we budgeted for this year. The report is there. If there's any questions, please ask.
Any questions? So this was spoken to in the budget. It's a substantial amount of money. However, it's a very important piece of equipment to have. Any fire department has it, and this just is helping us become a modernized, professionalized fire department. So any discussion? Okay, seeing none, a mover, please. Oh yeah, the recommendation be received as information, and that council approve and authorize staff to proceed with the purchase of the VHF radio communication equipment as approved in the 2019 capital budget from Talk Wireless for the amount of $102,004.50 plus applicable taxes. And the taxes, I understand, are only a couple of $1,000s, and we get that back. So that's the recommendation. A mover for that, please. Councillor McClellan, seconder. Councillor Gilmore, all in favor, and that is carried. Thank you. Okay, the next item is the Planning Staff Report 005-2019, and we'll look to our planner to speak to that, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to all of council. So this is a report regarding a zoning bylaw amendment for 21834 Highway 3. You may remember we had a public meeting for this file at the last council meeting. This property was the subject of a severance, which was conditionally approved by the Committee of Adjustment in May. One of the conditions was that Part 2 be rezoned to prohibit dwellings in the future, so it ensures that this property be used for agricultural purposes only. So the application proposes to rezone Part 2 from agricultural A2 and agricultural transition A1 to a site-specific 1 in both of those zones, again, that prohibits dwellings, so no future residential development can occur on that property. Agency comments noted no concern with the application, and I've recommended approval, and the bylaw is on the agenda for consideration this evening.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, seeing none. Recommendation is that the planning staff report PSR 005-2019 be received. That application Z03-2019 for lands described as part of Lot 18, Concession 2, Township of Wainfleet, known municipally as 21834 Highway Number 3, be approved for reasons outlined in PSR 005-2019. That the application is deemed to be consistent with the provincial policy statement 2014 and other matters of provincial interest, and that the zoning bylaw amendment attached as Appendix B be adopted. You have a mover for that, please. Councillor McClellan, seconder. Councillor Gilmore, all in favor, and that is carried. Okay, and we're now at 006-2019 Planning Staff Report, and I'll ask Sarah to speak to that one as well, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to all of council. So this is another zoning bylaw amendment application, this time for 31684 Dixie Road. And the application proposes to rezone part of the property from agricultural A2 to a site-specific agricultural A2 zone to permit a wedding venue and a reduced exterior side yard setback of 4.8 meters, where 15 meters is required. The applicant is proposing to use an existing barn for wedding ceremonies and receptions, and lands to the west of the barn for outdoor ceremonies, and lands to the south of the barn for a parking and loading area. We had a statutory public meeting, the previous council meeting on July 9th. The applicant's agent gave a small presentation, and we opened it up to questions and comments. We didn't receive any comments from the public at the public meeting. So the proposed wedding venue is considered an on-farm diversified use under the provincial policy statement and regional official plan, and considered an agritourism use unrelated to agriculture in the township's official plan. So through my report, I go through the applicable policies, and the proposed wedding venue does comply with the policies at each level. I've made some additions to the zoning bylaw amendment, including a definition of a wedding venue, so that we're very clear on what that use means. I've specified which category the wedding venue would fall under in terms of parking requirements, and limited the area to be used for the wedding venue to 1 hectare. And again, that's in line with provincial guidelines for these type of uses. So I've recommended approval, and again, the bylaw is on the agenda this evening for consideration.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments by staff? Councillor Cridlin.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Ms. Ivans, on the picture, it talks about part 1. Does that mean there's a part 2? And I may have this confused with other type of planning situations. Does this part 2 then be deemed permanent agriculture? So again, if my first part of the question is wrong, then so.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Cridlin. So part 1, highlighted in figure 2 in my report, that's the part of the property that's currently within just the agricultural A2 zone. Because this property is quite large, it has a couple of different zones on it. So it's got different zoning because there's a part within the hamlet. Part to the west where it's just white is a different zone. So part 1 is the agricultural A2 zone, and that's where the barn is located. So when the application came in initially, it was that whole section highlighted in gray, identified as part 1, be rezoned to allow this wedding venue. And through my analysis and the guidelines from the province, we really want to set a specific boundary for this use, because if we just give it carte blanche for the entire part 1, they could continually expand, because technically the whole area in gray, highlighted in gray in that figure, would be allowed to be used for a wedding venue. So that's why in the zoning amendment, we've kind of refined the area that can be used for that. And it's really just the 1 hectare around the existing barn that gives them sufficient area for that parking area, a septic, new septic bed, and facilities for that outdoor ceremony area.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor McClellan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Sarah, I don't see anything where they're showing cisterns for firefighting. And I'm just wondering if the fire department has spoken to that, or if you've spoken to that, because I see balancing tanks and biofilters and digesters for the septic. I see 1 small cistern that's on here, but nothing else. Have we not negotiated that or made that mandatory?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McClellan. So that will be required at building permit stage. Because this isn't subject to site plan control, we haven't gotten into that level of detail. But we did have a pre-consultation meeting with the applicants, and water for firefighting purposes was identified, as well as certain building code requirements. So the applicant is aware that they need to come in for a building permit application to make upgrades to the barn to make sure, because essentially they're taking it from an agricultural building to an assembly occupation, which requires some upgrades under the building code. So they're aware of that, and through that process, the chief building official will require details about water for firefighting purposes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this? Okay, seeing none, the recommendation is that planning staff report PSR 006-2019 be received. The application Z04-2019 for lands described as concession 3, part of lots 16, 17, and 18, Township of Wainfleet, known municipally as 31684 Dixie Road, be approved for reasons outlined in PSR 006-2019. That the application is deemed to be consistent with the provincial policy statement 2014 and other matters of provincial interest, and that the zoning bylaw amendment attached as Appendix C be adopted. We have a mover on that, Councillor Gilmore, seconder, Councillor McClellan. All in favor? And that is carried. Okay, we're moving on to Public Works Report 009-2019, and I'll look to our operations manager to speak to that, please.
Through your worship, to all members of council, before you use the staff report update for the Pearson Bridge Rehabilitation Project. This report is to update, it's a shared bridge with the township in West Lincoln. It received approval for funding prior to this council being sworn in, and it was budgeted prior in previous budgets as well. The plan was to receive, to go out for bids for 3 bridges at the same time, to try and get a larger project and larger budget, as well as bidders. It didn't quite work as planned. The three bidders that came in with their tender price actually came in pretty close to 43% above budget. So we've consulted with West Lincoln and we've reviewed it, and it is our opinion that we will not be awarding the contract because of the budget line items. And at this time, staff and the engineering consultants that were working on the project are recommending not to award it. We're reviewing reducing the overall scope of the work, and then we're hoping to re-tender at a better time, either in the fourth quarter or potentially beginning of next year, in order to receive better bids.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on that? Okay, seeing none, recommendation that this report be received for information. Mover on that, please. Councillor Van Vliet, seconder, Councillor Cridland. All in favor, and that is carried. Okay, Public Works Report 10-2019, and I'll ask the operations manager to speak to that, please.
Through your worship and members of council, the second staff report is for the tender process that was delivered for the new drainage excavator. Tender went out according to our purchasing policy, and during discussions with various bidders before the closing, there was an amendment made to it in regards to the timelines for the actual building of the equipment and the attachment. So an amendment was made at that time. But unfortunately, when the actual tender bids closed, we only received 1 bidder. At the time the tender did go out, we did contact various suppliers personally and phoned their offices to make them aware of the tender itself being out there. So attached to this report is also some potential leasing options if council is interested. As well as some options for extended warranties that are recommended in the report.
Okay, thank you. Discussion, questions? Councillor McClellan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Nan. I have a problem. There's at least 5 manufacturers or suppliers of excavators in our area of Southern Ontario. We got 1 bid. Have we asked or cannibalized an excavator so bad that none of them want to bid on our work? Or should we not be looking at maybe a different machine that'll do this work? Like, something's not right here. You never only get 1 bid on an excavator.
Your worship, to Councillor McClellan, we actually contacted the boom manufacturers as well, both AMI as well as NI. They did receive phone calls from bidders or proposed bidders that we contacted, and they did give out pricing. It's just the day of the closing, all of a sudden we got 1 tender bid. So the tender itself did not specifically, we didn't design a machine specifically for 1 bidder. We didn't try and eliminate any contractors by any means, but for some reason, I don't know why they didn't bid.
Go ahead,
Mr. Mayor. I'm not suggesting you did anything wrong or I just think we are trying to adapt one machine to do too many jobs, which makes it too complicated to build, and nobody wants to get involved in it. Is there another type of machine that maybe can do what we want to do? I'm thinking on the line of a grade all instead of an excavator. I'm just asking questions, Richard.
Through your worship, we did review that in the past. The grade all does have options with an extendable boom. That's what they're designed for. And they do make crawler machines. The unfortunate part is they are much heavier in a lot of areas when they start getting those machines, and it doesn't provide us the reach capacity with the extendable and the boom on the excavator. It needs to be small enough to get into certain areas because some of our drains are smaller, and we do have areas that we're trying to contain in the vegetation as best we can. But it also needs to be big enough to reach some of our larger drains. So the unfortunate part is we have a mix of sizing of drains. And with the extendable boom on it, provides us that capacity that we can do that from one side without doing too much damage anywhere else on the properties as well.
Okay, any other questions? Part of this is the extended warranty, and can you speak to that, please, Richard, in regards to whether the value of buying the extended warranty?
Through your worship to all members of council, we've proposed in this for an extended warranty because the issue becomes is the older the machines get, they're more prone to breakdowns. The extended warranty period, like we're hoping, and then the plan down the road is to actually have these machines cycled out sooner than later. So they're actually paid off in a period of time, and as well as building the reserves for the future. The hope is that we get through the warranty periods and we're getting rid of the machines, so we're not getting into major component costs. The basic extended warranty does cover most of the large component costing. The comprehensive, even though it sounds comprehensive, doesn't really justify the additional expenditures. Because it covers minor things like, yes, the air conditioner may go, well, I'm not going to send it all the way to Hamilton to get an air conditioner fixed. So the comprehensive doesn't really justify it, but some of the major components, for instance, if we have a pump failure due to a manufacturer and we're past the 1-year warranty period, those pumps alone could cost you $10,000.
Okay, thank you. And so looking at that, what you're suggesting, like on an 84-month of use of the machine, basic extended warranty is $22,700, 10,000 hours. So the cost per year would be a couple of $1,000, something like that, with the basic extended warranty?
That's correct. We're hoping to cycle them around the 8-year mark. So we're looking at just over $3,000 or just under $3,000.
Okay, any other discussion, Councillor Cridland?
Thank you, Mayor. I think we haven't really talked lease versus purchase, but if you can just comment that basically there's no different servicing. There won't be any service benefits going either leasing or purchase. That's basically just a financial decision. So service is the same whether we lease or purchase in terms of downtime, all that kind of stuff. Thank you.
That's correct. In fact, in a lot of times in leasing, like they don't give you a machine if it breaks down when the lease goes. They just say, okay, we'll come and fix it. The downtime doesn't change.
Councillor McCollum.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is kind of what I do. We should be getting rid of these machines around the 8,000 hour mark. Anything after that just starts costing you money. And your value, resale value goes down, everything. So we should be, council should know that at 8,000 hours, these things are going out the door and you'll get a good return on your used machine. So we should just keep that in mind when we're looking at extended warranties and all the rest of that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to Councilor McClellan's point, Richard, roughly how many hours a year do we put on that machine?
Through your worship to Councillor Gilmore, we are averaging just under 1,000. Depends on the weather and the restraints that the drains have put on us. This year, for instance, because of the volume of rain, we weren't able to do a lot of the drain work at the beginning. But we could have a dry year, which we had a few years ago, which we actually did. I think it was close to 1,200. We put almost 1,200 hours on it because we were working it nonstop. We had a great winter, so we were doing mowing with it, we were doing brushing with it, and then as soon as we got a chance to get on the drains, we were doing drain work. So it varies a bit, but we're averaging just under 1,000 hours. Because right now the machine's at 2010, and we're going to be cresting the 9,000 hours probably by the time this new one comes in.
If I could just continue one more comment. So I agree with Councilor McClellan about, limiting the hours, maximizing your resale. So perhaps as part of the bigger picture, we should just say that every 7 years we're going to turn the machine over and budget accordingly. And then you'll be within that window, possibly slightly less or right on the 8,000 mark, and maximize our return. And then most likely, I'm not generally I don't buy extended warranties for stuff. This is a personal comment. I just take my chances. I think that in the long run, you spend less money doing it. I know there's a lot of peace of mind, so I'm not hung up either way, but more importantly, in the big picture, let's just get on a program and turn the thing over. Every 7 years, we're going to turn it over. Everybody knows what the ground rules are, and save accordingly. That's more of a comment than anything.
Through your worship, just to answer that, we are working with the Treasury Department, and my numbers when I calculated OPS rates, etc., they roughly work out to an 8-year cycle is roughly what it works out to because of the extended boom costing, right? The additional costing for the extended boom. We can't technically charge more than the OPS rates because we could get challenged on that. But we can build in some additional costing, especially when it comes to our mower, etc. So we can look at those numbers, and if we need to tweak them slightly, we may be able to do that based on replacement costing of 7 years.
Councillor CAO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, also, that ties in very tightly with the new asset management program that we are in the midst of implementing, and we are looking at all the life cycles of all the equipment, all the buildings, so that is something we're strongly looking at going forward.
Okay, any other discussion or questions on that? Councillor McClellan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I agree with Councilor Gilmore. I would think if we took the money that it was going to cost us every year towards the extended warranty, just put it into our maintenance program. If we use it, we use it. If we don't use it at the end of it, 8 years, we've got $17,000 in the bank that we didn't waste. I see the same as Councilor Gilmore. We don't buy extended warranties.
Okay, thank you. I agree with that as well. So in the recommendation here, it says, with the addition of the extended warranty, is there a sense to remove that part of the recommendation to just simply authorize the purchase of the equipment? Councilor Gilmore?
Just a question to, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Richard. Often you can add those at a later time down the road. Is that, I'd be interested in, I certainly want your feedback on whether we're on the right track. You don't just take my personal opinion. I'd like to know what, you're the boss.
Through your worship to all members of council as well as Mr. Gilmore, we've been really fortunate because we have a great operator and we do have a decent maintenance program. We've been fortunate because we haven't had any major components go on the machine. We can add an extended warranty, but there is a time frame that we're going to be allowed to do that. And then we could actually have the machine here for a short period of time to see how it goes. You know, the basic reason for extended warranty is if you buy a limit, then you're arguing with the company all the time to get rid of it, and you're trying to do that within that basic warranty that they give you. But if that's council's choice, I mean, we could actually put that money aside for future. That's if that's the choice, we could do that.
So do we want to, separate this into two issues? One, purchasing of the machine. Secondly, whether or not we purchase the extended warranty. Appetite for that, or do we want to just agree with the recommendation as is? Richard?
Through your worship, there was the third portion of that, which was the inclusion for the trade-in value. So I just don't want to make sure we don't forget that as part of the recommendation, please.
Okay, thank you. So does anybody want to make an adjustment to the recommendation? Councillor Cridlin?
Okay, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, it sounds like there's a little bit of hesitation still on the warranty. It sounds like it's a bit of new ground. I think I heard that, maybe it's just to protect us for that initial, working out the, working with the machinery. So is there a compromise where we make the motion for the purchase, for the trade-in, and a 36-month, that's 5,000 hour basic warranty?
Okay, thank you. Any discussion on that? Do we have that's a motion? You make that?
I will make that then a motion. Thank you.
Okay, seconder, Councillor Van Vliet will second it. And all in favor? And that is carried. Okay, go ahead.
Clarification, Mr. Mayor, then. What we're looking at then is proceeding with the bid/actual table that appears at the top of page 3 of the report, plus the additional extended warranty that the councillor just identified. Correct? So that means that we're accepting the $45,000 trade-in value being perfect. Thank you.
Councillor McClellan?
Just one question, and I guess this would go to our treasurer more than anything. The monthly lease rates, we're stuck with pretty high buyouts on this thing. You know the cash flow better than we do. Can we make bigger lease payments and get that buyout down as low as we can? So when it comes to it, we're dumping this on the next council to buy this thing, right? So, I'd like to see the buyout maybe at $75,000 or something in that neighborhood. That.
Yeah, we have already voted on it, and
Okay.
it's done, so.
Well, the purchase price wouldn't change. It's just how you're gonna make your payments.
Yeah, up to the treasurer to speak to that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McClellan. The purchase price is different because it's the monthly lease rate plus the buyout option. So if you look at the total in bold, the purchase price is much higher if you would go with a lease, which is why he was recommending the outright purchase.
Okay. We've adopted that, it's all done. Okay, moving on to council correspondence. And I draw your attention to number 173, received from the town of Fort Erie, a request for endorsement and support of a resolution regarding whistleblowing policy. And are there any questions or discussion about that? Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. I would move that we support that resolution and endorse that.
Okay, that's moved, seconded. Councillor Cridland. All in favor of supporting that? And that is carried.
Mr. Mayor, through you regarding that, part of the recommendation or resolution from Fort Erie is asking Fort Erie staff to prepare a report with respect to the establishment of a whistleblowing policy for Fort Erie. By supporting this motion, are you requesting that we do a likewise policy development or policy review exercise, or are you simply endorsing the motion of Fort Erie?
It was to endorse, but
if that is the case, then endorsing it, once Fort Erie develops their policy, we'll be in a position to bring that policy to you as a council for your consideration, just as a course of natural follow-up, if that's acceptable.
yeah, the resolution was simply to circulate this to all Niagara regional councils and municipalities for their endorsement and support. So that we have done. If we wish to look at that for ourselves, then I would suggest that once Fort Erie has developed a policy on that, we could certainly look at that and consider that ourselves, but that would be down the road a little bit. So perhaps we could ask staff to monitor that process, and once they have their policy done, then we can have a copy of it and have a look at it. Okay? Good.
So we're now moving on to our bylaws, and through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to suggest that our council procedure bylaw 058-2019 be considered separately this evening and deferred to the next meeting in order for me to make some changes to the delegation section. I just want to include additional information on the timelines of delegation requests, particularly items that pertain to items that are on the agenda, so timelines around that.
Okay, so does council agree to have that separated from the other bylaws? Yes? Okay, move it. Councillor Cridland second, Councillor Van Vliet, all in favor? I got to read a bylaw first, so take those hands back. The resolution that the following bylaw be deferred for consideration to September 10th, 2019 regular meeting of council. And that bylaw is number 58, 2019, being a bylaw to repeal and replace bylaw number 67, 2016, being a bylaw to govern the proceedings of the Township of Wainfleet Council, the conduct of its members, and the calling of meetings. So I have a mover for that. Councillor Van Vliet, second. Councillor Cridland, all in favor. That is carried. Thank you. Okay, and so the remaining 4 bylaws, resolution of that is following bylaws to be read and passed this 23rd day of July 2019. Bylaw number 59, 2019, being a bylaw pursuant to the provisions of Section 34 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, to amend zoning bylaw number 34-2014 of the Corporation of the Township of Wainfleet with respect to those lands forming part of Lot 18, Concession 2, in the Township of Wainfleet, known municipally as 21834 Highway number 3. The second one is bylaw number 60, 2019, being a bylaw pursuant to the provisions of Section 34 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, to amend zoning bylaw number 34, 2014 of the Corporation of the Township of Wainfleet with respect to those lands forming part of lots 16, 17, and 18, Concession 2, in the Township of Wainfleet, known municipally as 31684 Dixie Road. The third one is bylaw number 61, 2019, being a bylaw pursuant to the provisions of Section 34 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, to amend zoning bylaw number 581-78 of the Corporation of the Township of Wainfleet with respect to those lands forming Concession 3, part of Lot 18, RP 59R9242, Parts 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 14, and 12 in the Township of Wainfleet. And the final bylaw is Bylaw 62-2019, being a bylaw to authorize entering into a municipal responsibility agreement with the Region of Niagara and Lakewood Beach Properties Limited for Lakewood Beach development. Have a mover for that, please. Councillor McClellan, second. Councillor Gilmore. All in favor, and those are carried. Okay, are there any notices of motion? Councillor McClellan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at the next council meeting, I'd like to put a notice of motion for the cost of our equipment, our staff, and depreciation and fuel, to include everything for all of our outside work, so that we can get a handle on what it really costs us to do these things.
Okay, that is duly noted. Any other notices of motion? Okay, seeing none. Proclamations, we have none. Other business? Councillor Cridlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to report that I did attend my first NPCA board meeting this past July 17th. One report that came forward that I think everybody might be interested in checking out was they created an Auditor General's report, a status report. So in that, it's got the status of every single item from the Auditor General. So if you want to read one report, that's a good one. And as the mayor noted, there's an extra meeting scheduled in August. I think that date is changing as we speak, so I would encourage everybody that wanted to attend that. I think it's moving up earlier. They're just doing a survey to see about it happening the week earlier. And just as a point of reminder, all the meetings are live streamed and then on the NPCA website for anybody wanting to watch them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other business? Okay, seeing none, we're going to do resolution. Council now move into closed session to discuss one item under Section 239(2)D of the Municipal Act 2001, Labor Relations or Employee Negotiations. K, a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or local board. One item, staffing matter. B, item under Section 239(2)B of the Municipal Act 2001, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local employees. C, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by a municipality or local board. One item, tax sale matter. C, item under Section 239(2)D of the Municipal Act 2001, Labor Relations or Employee Negotiations. Two items, staffing matters. And D, minutes of the closed meeting of council held July 9th and 16th, 2019. A mover for that? Councillor McClellan, Councillor Cridlin seconds it. All in favor? It's carried. We'll move into closed session.